9. Delta Airlines Flight 4819, operated by Endeavour Air, was the plane, a Bombardier CRJ-900LR, that had been flying for 16 years and carried 76 passengers and 4 crew members. It was supposed to be a regular flight, connecting people for business and travel between these two busy cities. But things took a terrifying turn when the plane tried to land at Toronto Pearson Airport. As it touched down, it hit the runway hard, bounced, and suddenly tilted to the right. Within seconds, the aircraft flipped upside down, with its right wing and tail breaking off on impact. A fire broke out, and the plane skidded to a stop on its roof just off the runway. Miraculously, everyone on board survived, but 21 passengers were hurt, with injuries like back sprains, head cuts, and breathing in fuel fumes. 3 of them were flown to a hospital, but thankfully, none of the injuries were life-threatening. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada quickly launched an investigation, working alongside U.S. aviation officials. They recovered the black boxes, devices that record flight data and cockpit conversations, to figure out what went wrong. Experts suggest strong winds or mechanical issues could have caused the plane to flip. Physicist Aaron Bansal explained that when a plane's balance is thrown off, it can start spinning out of control, which might explain what happened. Delta stepped in, offering each passenger $30,000 in compensation while making it clear they could still take legal action if they wanted. Delta's CEO Ed Bastian praised the pilots for their quick response and reassured the public that safety remains their top priority. Lines Flight 1288. Flight 1288, operated by Delta Airlines, was set to take off from Pensacola, Florida to Atlanta, Georgia on July 6, 1996. The McDonnell Douglas MD-88 had logged over 22,000 flight hours throughout its years of service. As the plane started speeding down runway 17 in Pensacola, disaster struck at around 46 miles per hour. The left engine suffered a major failure, causing metal fragments to shoot out of the engine and tear through the rear part of the cabin. Tragically, 2 passengers, a mother and her son sitting in row 37, lost their lives. 7 others were injured, including 2 seriously. The pilots immediately aborted takeoff and managed to bring the plane to a stop on the runway. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation and found that the failure was caused by a hidden crack in the front part of the engine's compressor fan. This tiny flaw had formed during manufacturing when Volvo was drilling the part for Pratt & Whitney. Over time, the crack grew, but it was never caught during routine maintenance checks, including Delta's inspections. In the end, the NTSB determined that the accident happened because of this unnoted defect and a lack of better inspection methods that could have caught the problem before it turned deadly. Flight 1086. Making its usual journey, Delta Airlines Flight 1086 was set to fly from Atlanta, Georgia to LaGuardia Airport in New York City on March 5, 2015. The McDonnell Douglas MD-88, which had been flying since 1987, carried 127 passengers and 5 crew members. As the plane came in to land at LaGuardia, the weather was rough, snowy, and foggy. The pilots touched down on runway 13, but almost immediately, things went wrong. The plane veered left, skidded across the snowy airfield, and crashed into the airport's perimeter fence. It finally stopped with its nose hanging over the berm above Flushing Bay. It was a terrifying moment, but thankfully, everyone on board survived. However, 29 people had minor injuries, and the plane was so damaged that it was scrapped. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the accident and found that the captain lost control of the plane because he used too much reverse thrust while landing. Normally, the engine's reverse thrust helps slow the plane down, but using too much can make the rudder less effective, especially on a slick, snow-covered runway. Delta's guidelines advise keeping the reverse thrust at 1.3, but data showed the captain pushed it to 1.9 just 6 seconds after landing. That was enough to make the plane slide off the runway. Flight 1111. Delta Airlines Flight 1111 was a passenger flight on June 23, 2023, traveling from Los Angeles to San Antonio. The flight used an Airbus A319-100 and was meant to transport both business and leisure travelers between the two cities. When the plane landed in San Antonio, it was taxiing to the gate with one engine still running. Tragically, a ground crew member, 27-year-old David Renner, was pulled into the running engine and died instantly. Renner worked for Unify Aviation, a company that provides ground services for Delta Airlines. The Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office later ruled his death as a suicide, caused by blunt and sharp force injuries. After the incident, the National Transportation Safety Board reviewed the case but found no safety issues with the plane or the airport. Because of this, they decided not to launch a full investigation. Unify Aviation expressed deep sadness over the loss of their employee. They also stated that their investigation found the tragedy was not linked to any of their safety procedures or work policies. Flight 982. On January 20th, 2024, Delta Airlines Flight 982 was scheduled for a trip from Atlanta, Georgia to Bogota, Colombia. The Boeing 757-200, flying since 1992, carried 172 passengers and 6 crew members. Just as the plane was about to take off, something unexpected happened. The nose wheel suddenly detached and rolled away, forcing the pilots to cancel the takeoff. Another pilot in a nearby plane noticed what had happened and radioed the crew saying, "One of your nose tires just came off. It just rolled off the runway behind you." Thankfully, no one was hurt. Everyone on board was safely taken back to the terminal, and Delta arranged a different plane to complete the trip later that day. The Federal Aviation Administration started an investigation to figure out what went wrong. Since the Boeing 757 was 32 years old, experts pointed out the importance of regular maintenance, especially for critical parts like landing gear. Boeing, which stopped making the 757 in 2004, didn't comment and left it to Delta since they handled the maintenance on their planes. Delta later apologized to passengers for the delay and assured them that safety is always their top priority. The aircraft was repaired and put back into service the next day. Flight 191. Flight 191, operated by Delta Airlines, was en route from Fort Lauderdale, Florida to Los Angeles, California, making a planned stop in Dallas, Texas. On August 2, 1985, the flight was being operated by a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar aircraft, carrying both business and vacation travelers. As the plane got closer to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, the weather started to get worse due to nearby thunderstorms. While trying to land on runway 17L, the aircraft suddenly hit a powerful downdraft called a microburst, a strong burst of wind that pushes planes down unexpectedly. This caused the plane to lose altitude very quickly. The pilots tried to recover, but the plane crashed about a mile short of the runway. It first hit a car on a nearby highway, killing the driver, then slammed into 2 water tanks before breaking apart. Out of the 163 people on board, 136 lost their lives, while 27 survived, some with serious injuries. Sadly, 1 person on the ground also died. After investigating, the National Transportation Safety Board determined the crash happened because the pilots didn't have the training or equipment to detect and avoid microbursts. At that time, neither the airport nor the plane had advanced technology to warn of such dangerous wind patterns. In response, the Federal Aviation Administration required all commercial planes to have wind shear detection systems and install Doppler radar at major airports to help predict dangerous weather conditions in real time. Flight 1141. Delta Airlines Flight 1141 was a domestic flight from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas to Salt Lake City, Utah. On August 31, 1988, the flight was operated by a Boeing 727-200, which had been in service since 1973. The plane was carrying passengers traveling for both business and leisure. As the plane took off from Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, it failed to gain enough lift and crashed. Investigators later found that the pilots had forgotten to extend the wing flaps and slats, parts of the wing that helped the plane take off properly. Without them, the aircraft couldn't generate enough lift and stalled just after leaving the ground. The right wingtip hit the ground, the plane struck a landing system antenna, and then it crashed and caught fire. Out of 108 people on board, 14 lost their lives, including 2 crew members and 12 passengers. Another 76 people were injured. The aircraft was completely destroyed. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation found that the pilots were distracted before takeoff, chatting about non-work-related topics instead of focusing on their checklist. This broke the sterile cockpit rule, which requires crews to avoid unnecessary conversations during critical flight phases. As a result, they missed the crucial step of setting the flaps and slats for takeoff. The warning system, which should have alerted them to this mistake, didn't go off, possibly due to a malfunction or maintenance issue. In the end, the NTSB blamed the crash on the crew's failure to properly prepare for takeoff, along with poor discipline in the cockpit and flaws in Delta's operational procedures. Flight 954. On December 20th, 1972, Delta Airlines Flight 954 was flying from Tampa, Florida to Chicago O'Hare. The plane, a Convair CV-880, was being flown by Captain Robert E. McDowell, First Officer Harry D. Greenberg, and Flight Engineer Claude F. Fletcher, along with 4 flight attendants. The flight took off from Tampa and landed at O'Hare. When they arrived, the crew was told that runways 14L and 14R were being used for departures, but no one mentioned that runway 27L was also in use. As Flight 954 taxied toward the terminal, thick fog made it hard to see, with visibility down to just a quarter mile. The first officer radioed ground control, saying they were inside the bridge and waiting for their gate. But the ground controller misunderstood and thought that the plane was still north of the bridge. The controller then told them to wait in the 32 box, which referred to the 32R run-up pad. Thinking the controller knew their exact location, the crew taxied toward the 32L run-up pad, crossing active runway 27L. At that moment, North Central Airlines Flight 575, a DC-9, was taking off. Flight 575's pilots spotted a Delta CV-880 crossing just 1,600 feet ahead. They tried to lift off early, but couldn't. The DC-9's landing gear hit the Delta plane, sending it skidding off the runway and into flames. 10 passengers died, and 15 were injured. Miraculously, all 93 on the Delta flight survived, with only 2 minor injuries. The NTSB investigated and found that miscommunication between the Delta crew and ground control was the main reason for the accident. The dense fog only made things worse, reducing visibility. Flight 723. On July 31, 1973, Delta Airlines Flight 723 was flying within the U.S. using a McDonnell Douglas DC-931. The flight started in Burlington, Vermont, stopped in Manchester, New Hampshire, and was supposed to end in Boston, Massachusetts. The Manchester stop was added at the last minute to pick up passengers from an earlier flight that was canceled due to bad weather in Boston. That morning, thick fog covered Boston, making it hard to see. Clouds were low at 400 feet and visibility was just half a mile. As Flight 723 approached Logan Airport's runway 4R, air traffic control was busy handling another possible collision and delayed the landing clearance. By the time they gave it, the plane was too fast and too high, making for a shaky approach. The aircraft drifted off course, dropped too low, and at 11:08 a.m., crashed into a seawall 3,000 feet short of the runway. The impact destroyed the plane, killing 87 of the 89 people on board. 2 people initially survived but were badly injured. One died shortly after reaching the hospital, and the other passed away months later. The NTSB found that the pilots likely misused the flight director, accidentally setting it to go-around mode instead of approach. Distracted by the faulty system and failing to call out their altitude, they didn't realize they were too low. The crash happened because the crew lost awareness during an unstable approach in bad weather. Confusing air traffic control instructions and the malfunctioning flight detector also played a role.